You're listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 51.
Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell.
I'm very happy to welcome Steve Ranford, Senior Scientist at AgResearch from New Zealand today. Steve, how are you? It's good to have you on the show today.
I'm very well, thanks, Elisabeth, and thank you for having me on your show.
Great.
It's nice to be here.
Wonderful. So I would like to ask you to introduce yourself and tell us what kind of work do you do in the wool industry?
Okay, so I'm Steve Ranford. I work at AgResearch in New Zealand, which is one of the government-owned research and innovation centres. And the sort of work I do in the wool industry ranges from material specification, that includes both the fibre level and at fabric level, right through to process control.
And what sort of, you already mentioned a little bit about AgResearch, but tell us a little bit more about the work that is done at AgResearch.
So AgResearch's purpose is really to enhance the value and productivity and profitability of New Zealand's pastoral and agri-food and agri-technology sector. So we partner with the pastoral and agri-food sectors to identify innovation that's needed to deliver our collective expertise to create value for New Zealand, essentially.
Okay, and then that includes wool, because wool is an important industry for New Zealand.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You know, there's still 28 million sheep in New Zealand, and they all producing high quality products, and so we're looking at the productivity and quality of those sorts of functions in the sheep industry. So AgResearch has around about a total of 616 people, and of those people, about 230 people are working in science, 162 in the technical area, technicians, and around 225 in non-science. So it's a reasonably sizable organisation, but of course, you know, textiles and bio-based products is a two teams within that total number of people.
I always wonder, wool is already such an old fiber, but why is it still possible to do more research on wool? Don't we already know everything? Or what are you kind of focusing on at AgResearch?
Well, it is a fibre that's been around for a long period of time, and you know, the relationship between humans and farming animals like sheep is a very long and established one. But the fibre itself is a very fascinating fibre. It's got a lot of components to it that provide all sorts of functional outcomes for people who use it, but also it can be looked at as a protein source as well, and so there's lots of different uses for the fibre and lots of things to be discovered yet.
And you say it's like a protein fiber, and you also used biopolymer earlier. Is that why, like, I always see that wool in sports and fashion has like kind of a renaissance, but is that also because of some of these properties of wool, that wool also has a renaissance in research? And maybe tell us why that is the case.
Yeah, certainly it's classed as a bio-based product, and therefore it fits into the category of renewables. And the economy in New Zealand is a large renewables economy, and by that we mean all of the materials that we export come from a renewables system. And being an agri-based economy, that comes down to, for example, pasture, and looking at pasture and how that can be improved and maintained to nurture the animals from which we get products like wool. But wool has those traditional textile and high quality fabric and interior fabrics that we use a lot, but it also can be looked at as a protein and other material sources as well. So it's a very versatile material to work with.
Yeah, and we talked, I think, in one of the last episodes to Graham Ormondroyd, who was also doing research on wool in regards to bio-based products and biopolymers. But for those listeners who haven't listened to him yet, can you explain to us exactly what is a biopolymer and also what is a bio-based product?
Well, simply put, biopolymers are polymers that are biodegradable. So we're working in that sector of materials that are biodegradable materials. We often extract these materials from all of the sorts of things that are around us in terms of plants and animal fibre and so forth. But just to give you an example, cellulose, for example, is a biopolymer. Sugar, starch, these are all biopolymers, and so they can actually be used to research and cross-link and make different materials from what we regard as fairly simple materials that we know about on a day-to-day basis.
Such as, like, what would a biopolymer then be made into?
So the biopolymers, I'll give you an example. Another example, if you think of expanded polystyrene, for example, that's a synthetic material, but it can be replaced by natural plant extract materials, and that same natural foam material that you make from a biopolymer is biodegradable. So the big feature about biopolymers is that they have this biodegradability, which is very desirable in today's world.
And then can gradually replace some of the synthetic products that we use.
That's right. It can, if you, with some careful scientific research and development, you can actually replace some of the synthetic products that are around us, some of the plastics.
Okay, that sounds really good. And tell us a little bit more about then the exact research you're working on at AgResearch.
Well, I have a couple of important areas that we're working on. The main one, I guess, that we're tackling at the moment is to do with the environment. The environment, of course, has got to be looked after very carefully because we are, as humans, are growing at quite a steady rate. And if we look at farming practices combined with the human growth, intensification of farming and human growth together, mean that we've got to be very careful about how we use our natural capital, that is our water and our land. And we're very careful about how we're going about expanding farming practices, and wool is part of that story. But at the same time, looking after the land. So at the moment, for example, we're looking at the biodegradability aspects of wool and how they compare with other fibres, to give you one example.
And do you already have some results that you can share with us, or is that still yet to be discovered?
Yes, we have produced some results through some university studies earlier on, some earlier results. It's a little bit too early for some of the later stuff that we're doing, but some of the earlier results show that wool's got a very good propensity to biodegrade, particularly in what we call aerobic biodegradation and in water and so forth. So it's there's very good prospects there for wool. Of course, if you look around at products that are similar to wool, like bird feathers, these are other keratin products, you don't see a massive build-up of these sorts of products in our environment, and that's because they're continually moving through the degradation processes.
And what would be like the ideal condition for wool to biodegrade?
The ideal condition would be, well, first of all, in the whole life cycle of wool as products, we can use them and then we can downcycle the products and recycle some of the material. So, for example, if we're taking wool from interior textiles, we can actually harvest some of that wool from the textiles that have already been used and then reuse them in other products. But the ideal conditions are effectively in a fairly well aerated soil environment where you've not got huge concentrations of the fibre. So it has great prospects in that direction.
So basically, if you bury it in soil, and that would be like helping then to biodegrade the.
Well, it comes if you're wanting to bury large masses of the fibre in soil. That's not necessarily a great thing, because that gets into a different sort of a condition. But I was really referring to the more natural processes. So what we're looking at is, if you want to deal with the fibre on a higher mass basis, then are there processes that we can develop where we could actually essentially render the wool into a different form, even down to chemical forms themselves, which may be useful and safe.
So you're basically looking at biodegradation of really large amounts of wool, for example, in wool carpets, and like kind of like an industrial biodegrading. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's correct. So
Okay.
for example, wool carpets, you can use a lot of the woolen carpets for new products and recycle those, but there is always a certain mass that's left over, and you don't necessarily want to put that as one big mass into the soil and compress it. It's better that fibre is, if you like, digested in a process, and you can make something else from it.
So would that be getting us back to the biopolymers, that we can then use it for something else?
Well, there are possibilities there, absolutely. With the digestion of wool, you can make new polymers from the fibre.
Oh, I like that. That sounds like a recycling biodegrading combination. That sounds quite interesting. And environmentally friendly. Okay, that sounds good. And is there another project that you're working on besides the biodegradation?
Yeah, we're working on what we call wool traceability, which is effectively looking at technologies whereby companies can trace their products as they move through the supply chain. So, for example, if we took wool from the North Island of New Zealand or from Western Australia, we could see different signatures on the wool and know where it came from. And then companies themselves, as they use this wool to manufacture products, they can also put some signatures into the wool if they wish, and that's their own special signature, which they can then trace as it moves along into the retailing of the products.
And what would the signature actually be? Like, how should we imagine when you use the word signature? What would that be?
Okay, so when an animal like a sheep drinks water and eats, it puts a particular signature in the fibre. So literally the animal is what it eats. So we call these isotopes. We're looking at isotopes. These are what we call intrinsic markers, and you can get hydrogen isotopes and carbon isotopes, nitrogen isotopes, and depending on where you are in the world and what water is being used by the animal and the pastures being used by the animal, those isotope signatures will be different. They will be developed to different levels depending on what they're eating and drinking. And so for intrinsic markers used in traceability, like isotopes, they can be useful just to determine, the country of origin, for example, of fibre.
That sounds very interesting, and also playing like a detective or something, because it seems like hidden, but you can detect it somehow.
Well, that's right. I mean, in fact, in forensics, policing forensics, this sort of technology is used a lot, because if you have fibres left in around crime scenes, or in cars, on windows, around doors, then you can actually analyse those fibres and then make a match with where that fibre came from.
Okay, and that we can also do for wool. That sounds really cool, actually. And I also wanted to ask you something you mentioned earlier, and I also read in your biography that you worked a lot on specifications. And can you maybe explain to us, like, what exactly would be a specification, and why are they important for the wool industry?
Well, the specifications of the fibre are linked very closely to the end uses for the fibre. So the specifications determine what you can convert that fibre into and get good use from. So, for example, for strong wools above 35 micrometers in diameter and above a certain length, those fibres are very good for interior textiles, for carpets, for example. Whereas if you're down at the 18 micrometer diameter level, these fibres are very good for apparel. So the specification of the fibres as the wool comes off the animal and goes into the marketing systems that we use is very important for the buyers to understand, because that determines how they can actually convert the fibre into high value end products.
So specification would be like, well, like you said, the fiber length, micron, maybe strength, color. These kind of attributes would be called specifications.
Correct, yeah. So these are material specifications. So, back in the 1970s and 1980s, the material specification work that was going on in innovation companies, particularly in producer countries like South America, New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, these specification systems were very important to the producers, because they determined the quality of their fibre and the fitness for purpose for the products that they were going to be converted into.
And I understand that you were one of those researchers who actually defined like how these specifications can be measured.
That's correct. So we were working, for example, on colour measurement. In the very early years, we set up colour measurement. We worked with Australia very closely on this technology, and we were examining what the colour measurements for the different types of fibres coming from different sorts of sheep, what the colour measurements were like, and then how those colour measurements could be used for technical marketing of the fibre. And then, of course, as the technology was transferred to the International Wool Textile Organisation's suite of standard test methods, the rest of the industry learned how to use these measurements in order to set up their purchasing strategies and then how to use the measurements so that they could make the products that they wanted. For example, if you wanted a nice pastel shade, then you would want a brightness of the colour which was very high. So the brightness determines how light a shade you can dye the wool to. So if you wanted very light shades, you needed very good colour measurements.
Okay, that's interesting to hear a little bit the background, because I think today we use these test standards and the specifications like every day without actually realizing that a lot of work had to go into that many years ago.
Yes, correct. That's right. And alongside those technical standards, of course, the commercial sectors of the industry worked very closely with the technical people in order to set in place regulations that really go hand in hand with those technical specifications. So there's some very quite sophisticated technology that we call spectrometry that's used for reflecting light off the fibres that can measure these sorts of things. So colour was the first one, but we also use spectrometry in our wool scours and in our commercial testing laboratories to measure the amount of moisture and the amount of wool grease that's left on the fibre or is on the fibre after the cleaning processes. And those light reflecting technologies, they're very very good technologies to use.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to ask you one more question from your perspective as a researcher. What is the most fascinating thing about wool, or maybe the most fascinating property of wool that's like your personal preference?
The most fascinating topic is really the warmth that you can get from the fibre for the weight of material that it measures out as, or it's the warmth for weight factor basically that fascinates me. You can get a very fine fibre and you can make a construct, knitted garment, a woven garment, and this can be very light but very, very warm in fairly cool climates.
And do you, as researchers or scientists, actually have numbers or equations for that, or can you actually measure that as well?
Well, the sort of work that we did in that area, this sort of warmth for weight research that was done, really centered around building new machines that gave us the ability to manufacture new types of yarns that would entrap the air more efficiently between the different yarns to produce that warmth factor and give you that luxurious feel. So we can do the same sort of thing for both apparel fibres, and we can also manufacture machines that give us special effects for fibres that you walk on as well. So fibres that you have in your lounge, on your carpets and in your curtains and upholstery. So, the warmth for weight issue really has been researched a lot in relation to development of new processing machinery.
That is something I didn't know. I didn't know that was a warmth for weight factor, but I'm glad I do now. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, before we come to an end, what is the best way for listeners to connect with AgResearch and learn more about the work that is going on over there?
Well, the listeners can use our website, www.agresearch, which is all one word, agresearch.co.nz, and there's a website full of interesting projects and an introduction to some of the people on that website.
Excellent. And I'll make sure to also link to the website in the show notes. Thank you so much, Steve, for your time. And I wish you lots of success with any further research that's going on with wool.
Thanks very much, Elisabeth. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
A lot of the work Steve and his team are doing over at AgResearch is quite complex. Therefore, I encourage you to follow up on anything that was unclear today. You can find all the links that were mentioned in today's show notes over at elisabethvandelden.com/051. Once again, elisabethvandelden.com/051. And that's where you'll for sure find the link to the AgResearch website. One quick tip for you today. I have put together a Wool Calendar 2018 as a free download on my website. The Wool Calendar 2018 is a document that includes all relevant wool dates, fairs and events throughout the year 2018 as far as they are already available. This calendar can help you plan your 2018 and get you prepared for your social media activities as well as your travel well in advance. Download the calendar over at elisabethvandelden.com/wool-industry-calendar-2018. That is indeed a complicated link, so here it is once again. Visit elisabethvandelden.com/wool-industry-calendar-2018. But I will also make it available on the homepage of my website so that it's much easier to find. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next week and bye for now.